Most of us will not have massive muscles. Genetically, we're just not in that area. Your higher level guys, influencers, maybe they have some extra help. Who knows?
Hey, it's not too late to get healthy. Let's talk about the gospel of fitness with Steve McKinney on Steve Brown, etc.
He's an old white guy, an author, broadcaster, and seminary professor who's sick of religion. And he's brought friends. Please welcome Steve Brown, etc.
Hey, we're so glad you're here. You always have a place at our table. And for this program, you're going to learn something that could change your life. I'm not. It's too late for me, but it's not too late for you. By the way, I'm Steve, the aforementioned old white guy. Matthew Porter is our executive producer. He's here. Matthew wants to fight aging, but he's nervous since aging has a record of 117 billion to 0.
Undefeated.
Yeah, right. It's all wasted, man. And if you do everything our guest says to do, it's going to be when it's your time to go. A sinking ship without anything to throw overboard. And our producer, Jeremy, is in the little glass booth. Jeremy is fit. He plays high-energy, 3-hour rock shows, and his heart rate is always elevated, waiting for the client to hand him the check.
That is accurate.
Our one-man IT department, John Myers, is in the tech bunker. As the old saying goes, if it ain't broke, John Myers has probably fixed it. Dr. George Bingham is the president of Key Life. When it comes to watching the Super Bowl, George leads the league in passing out before halftime. And Kathy Wyatt is the soft, feminine side of the program. Kathy prefers baking to football in her world. Do I have to say this?
We've come this far, Steve.
A turnover is a good thing. that
Wow.
The
This
old
is out-
Oh, you know
sports
what?
baking puns.
That
coming in
was
handy.
that was pretty good,
especially
Matthew.
the apple one.
Although now that we have Steve here, I think the next baking experience will be like tofu and grapes or something instead of what I usually bring
I
in.
don't think so. One of my favorite people is our guest today, and I've known him for years. And you need to know that over those years, he encourages me and has on numerous occasions when he didn't know I needed it, but I knew I needed it, and he's made a difference. And he's done that in a lot of lives back in the days when we had specific ministries to pastors. Steve wrote a blog for pastors on health issues, because pastors are not generally the most healthy people on the face of the earth. Steve's an author, a pastor, and the owner of Fitness and More Incorporated. He holds a black belt in jiu-jitsu and has been a first-class personal trainer for more than 30 years, so don't mess with him. And Steve's new book is titled The Gospel of Fitness, a relational approach to aging gracefully. Steve's kind of like God. He didn't stop me from sinning, but he sure took the fun out of it. Most folks turning into this show are thinking they got the wrong program because we usually talk about religious stuff, not exercise. But as believers, we shouldn't be dismissive about saying stuff that's about health and being active, should we?
Absolutely not. I mean, that's just a big part of what our faith is about. If you think about it, some verses talking about exercise profits us little. Doesn't say it doesn't profit us at all. So
That's my life's verse.
yeah, and so what we do, what we do with the idea behind it, I just look at, I deal with a lot of people in my business and in the church, and people struggle with trying to keep themselves healthy. I need to feel better. The aging process is real. What's interesting, Steve, it begins to happen at about 35 years old. And the first thing that happens is called sarcopenia. It's age-related muscle loss. You begin to lose your strength. And that is the number one thing that happens to us. Aging is the loss of strength. And you could just notice it. And it's very, very incremental. With that loss of strength means you're losing muscle, which slows your metabolism down, which means even if you eat the same amount of food, you gain body fat. So then you're in this dilemma. And the dilemma is I don't feel good because I don't have as much muscle. I don't have as much energy, and I'm gaining some body fat. And so, and I just try to look at that and say, hey, there are simple ways to do it, but there's just a plethora of information on the internet that is so confusing. And so what I did here, and I've been doing this for over 30 years. When I first started my business, I started in my garage, and I just had a couple of clients, but I kept records on everyone. I did tons of research, and I kept records. I'm like, what can we do, not just for a minute, but for a lifetime? How do we create a lifestyle that fits our faith in with eating healthy, still enjoying our life, and not torturing ourselves? That's why I call it aging gracefully. So that's kind of the approach that I use with that.
It's a very, very practical book. Most of us, and I include myself, when we start feeling convicted that we need to do something, whether that's spiritually or physically in the area where Steve is, in fact, he's in both areas, we say, I'm going to set an hour aside every morning, and I'm going to have a season of prayer before I begin my day. And after 5 minutes, you've said everything you want to say to God, and you don't know what to do with the other 55. And Steve, in this book, there are people that do that with exercise. One guy you were talking to was doing it 5 days a week. And you said it nicely, but you said, are you crazy? You can't do that. And you designed something different for him. Tell us about that.
So you just made a great point. And what you said is when you pray for 5 minutes, then you got to fill in the blanks for 55 minutes. I mean, you can get out the phone book if you want, but you're still searching. So the idea is I went to the gym. I was visiting my cousin in Alabama, and I always find a gym to go to. It's my safe place. I just love it. When I go in, put my hoodie up, I got my earphones in, and I'm going to work. I'm not there long. I just have a plan. I don't like to mess around with it, but it's just, for me, it's medicine. It's exercise, it's medicine. So I'm watching a guy lift weights across an older guy, and he does like 20 reps in like 10 seconds. It was a very short period of time. Then he rests for like a minute. And then he does it again. And this goes on and on with every exercise. Why? I left, but I thought about it, and I was calculating, and I'm like, this guy probably, if you look at the amount of exercise that he actually did, was probably 10 minutes of exercise and 50 minutes of rest. And so what I do, and does that make sense?
Yes.
So how I set this up is I train people with one set. I train them hard, and I challenge them. I add a little bit each time, but we reduce the rest time in between sets. So now we're getting what's called an anaerobic benefit, which is our strength training, and an aerobic benefit because our heart rate is elevated for this period of time. So I developed something I call the 3W approach to fitness. And easiest way to remember it, to simplify everything, you hold up 3 fingers and it makes a W. It's weight training, walking, and watching your diet. And those are the ways that I simplify the whole process for people.
Oh, man. Well, it's been nice having you on the program. You know, in a sense, being a pastor, and Steve's a great pastor, by the way, and being in fitness training has some similarities. You're never going to run out of sin. I mean, that's going to be here till we get home. But on the other hand, about everybody I know feels a lack in the area you're talking about. I mean, I know maybe one or two, but of the lots of people that I know, almost all think they're overweight, they're tired, they need to do something about it. And so I'm bringing this up to point out that you're making a lot of money, and I would like a contribution to Key Life. Hey,
I'll just leave that alone.
by the way, Steve's going to be, if you're in the Orlando area, he's going to be at Forge, and he's going to be speaking. He and Pete are really good friends and have been for years. They both make me feel guilty, but if you'd like to go to Forge, go to forgetruth.com, and you can get some details for the time when Steve McKinney is going to be here, living color and in person at the Forge meetings. By the way, the name of this book, and don't let it scare you because it's very practical, it's very simple, and it's doable. The Gospel of Fitness, a relational approach to aging gracefully. Frankly, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to cuss and spit and kick until I die, going out in a blaze of glory. Thanks for joining us. We're talking with our friend Steve McKinney, and his book is called Not As I've Been Quoting It Previously. It's the only time I ever made a mistake. Well, there was another time when I thought I made a mistake. The Gospel of Fitness, a rational, not relational, a rational approach to aging gracefully.
Steve, I want to go back to something you said previously about the importance of lifting weights. I think for somebody who's not familiar with it, they hear that, and sometimes they immediately jump to, well, oh, look, I'm not looking to be some kind of buff, ripped person or whatever. But that doesn't necessarily go hand in hand, having toned muscles, because, like you said, it goes to the metabolism. Can you just dive into a little bit more on that and kind of dispel that myth?
It's a great question, and here's the idea behind that, or the answer to the question. You won't. And what I mean by that is most of us will not have massive muscles. Genetically, we're just not in that area. We're in this range, this bell curve of we can gain some muscle. Most people can. But then you have your higher level guys who become influencers on the internet, and they can gain all kind of muscle. Maybe they have some extra help. Who knows? But the point being is, my goal is not to build bodybuilding type people. My goal is to increase people's strength. And you use the word tone, and here's all tone is. Tone is muscle without body fat. That's all it is. It's muscle with less body fat. Your muscles, when you lift weights, they get toned. The reason you don't see them is because a lot of times they're hidden behind body fat. Now, here's the interesting thing. Body fat levels are not controlled at all, or very little, I should say, by exercise. Body fat levels are controlled by dietary intake, and that's where people mess it up, because what happens is, I grew up Catholic, and so when you sin, you had to say an act of contrition. And so a lot of times overeating causes the act of contrition to do more exercise. And then the problem with that as you age is your body begins to wear down, and then you get what's called overuse injuries. And so what you're trying to do is you're trying to out exercise a bad diet, which never works. All it does is breaks your body down. So I try to say, hey, stay within a framework of being reasonable. And that's why I say it's a rational approach to fitness. The exercise program, you go lift weights, it takes you, when you first start, it may take a little longer, but you can be in and out in 15 minutes. But the workout itself is very, very challenging. And then you watch your calorie intake a bit and take a walk at the end of each day. And that is really the simple process that goes through. And there's ways to optimize it as well. For example, there's a guy that did a study, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he did a study for calorie burn after 3 hours, okay? So what he did was he measured how many calories were burned after 3 hours of a particular exercise. The first one was walking, and he measured the calorie burn. The next one was having a meal and walking, and he measured the calorie burn. And then the last one was walking and having a meal. And what he concluded was the middle one, having a meal and walking, increased your BMR, your basal metabolic rate, by 30%. So what I do, and I talk about a rational, I'm not going to call it relational, but a rational approach to fitness. What I do is I say, if you optimize everything, if you make it simple and you use the nuances, your results will be there, and you won't have to spend a lot of time in the gym. It's very, very efficient. Because like Steve said, somebody training 5 days a week, well, if you think about that, and you're training an hour at a time, that's 20 hours. It's a part-time job that you're doing.
Yeah.
And so, and you're a slave to that. And so for me, it's like, hey, 1 to 3 days a week based on what you need literally for 15 minutes will get you stronger.
Great.
Just a clarification. So did you just say eat while you walk?
No, I said.
I was going to say that's yeah.
Boy, that's what
I heard.
I think this calls for further
That's
testing.
tough. That's
I
tough to
think
do
we
with a
took a
salad.
vote, and
That's
that's
tough to
exactly
do with
what-
a salad and a fork.
Here's
Say it
what's
be easy,
interesting.
Kathy.
Here's what's interesting.
Tacos, you could do that.
You have a meal, and then I would just tell my clients within 15 minutes, take a 30-minute casual walk.
Okay.
And what's interesting about that, what you'll notice like you'll belch. You'll notice that your body actually digests your food better. So it's just little bitty nuanced things that just optimize your health and nutrition and your body.
This book, by the way, is filled with this kind of material. I mean, there wasn't a single page as I was reading it. Steve's too cheap to send us the hard copy, so we had a digital.
It's not out yet. It's not out
And
yet.
I got my exercise by hitting the next page button on my computer. But it's filled. Every page is filled with something like what you're hearing. And I haven't heard that. Talk to us about shame-based Christianity and shame-based physical exercise.
Yeah. So you go back to the shame-based Christianity. It's do harder, try harder.
Yeah.
God wants more. It's exhausting. It's exhausting. There's a point where you just can't do that. Just can't do that anymore. And it really is finished, in my opinion. It really is. And the beauty of that is the motivation for me to, like, with sharing what I'm sharing on the gospel of fitness, it's tied in with my faith. There's no doubt about it. And I always think about this. I think, man, I don't like to self-promote. I'm really uncomfortable with this whole thing, but I have a message here that'll change your life. Now, not only in my faith in the Lord, but in the way that I approach the whole fitness thing. So with that, I just go in the direction of my faith in Jesus that changes my life. But when I look at shame, what I mean by that is the standard has been set by social media in a lot of ways, where people look at things and say, look how great this particular person looks, or how great their life is, which creates a lot of shame for us because we're not in that particular area. And when I'm dealing with people, there's this shame of not knowing what to do, but also there's almost and I use this word very carefully, this phrase, self-hatred that goes along with that. I remember Brennan Manning saying what the church needs is a cure for self-hatred. And I think there's just something to that when it comes to health and fitness. I just say, do the best you can and allow yourself to age gracefully. however you look or wherever you end up, that's perfectly fine. But just try to move forward, because any step in the right direction is going to make you feel better, and it's going to help you. And I want to be around for my grandson. I want to be around to make a difference. So that's kind of how I approach it.
Well, I'm so much older than anybody in this room, and you, Steve, and I've done it wrong. So I would rather be an example of grace and mercy. Do it wrong, and Jesus will love you anyway. Do it wrong, and you might live to be as old as Brown is, the old white guy. Hey, this is a great book, and it's a great discussion. And it's a very, very helpful book. It's not like anything you've ever read on getting in shape. This is doable, and it's doable by normal people. And the title is The Gospel of Fitness, a Rational Approach to Aging Gracefully. And I have done that. I don't want to be pietistic or to brag too much, but it was grace, and I'm still here. We're so glad you're with us, and this is a helpful program, and you'll be better for it, so don't touch the dial, okay? We're hanging out with Steve McKinney. You can keep up with his work at fitnessandmore.net, fitnessandmore.net. Are you on social media, Steve?
Yeah, Steve, I'm on Facebook and I'm on Instagram. I just don't know how to use Instagram very well. So I'm just old and I am on Facebook, just at Steve McKinney, and Fitness and More on Facebook as well.
Okay.
So yeah, that's kind of where my group is generally.
Steve, in your W's, we were talking about walking, and then some people mentioned swimming and so forth. So it almost sounds like that's one of those where you might have some substitute kinds of things. When you talk about the W on weight training, can you give some guidelines on that? That always strikes me as a very sort of, you need a specific program and you do this many for that particular, and like a real detailed outline kind of thing. Is there ways of simplifying that?
Yeah, that's what I tried to do in the book. But let me address the other W of walking. And you said swimming, and you're absolutely right. That's perfect. So is biking. But what I suggest is what I call low impact aerobic activity. Not a big fan of running, especially as you age. If people like it, they can get away with it without joint pain. That's fine. But after a while, most people, that does wear their body down. So that's kind of what I've seen over the years. But back to your question, in the book, the program is simply set out. And so what I tell people, I think, like when you look at the home program, because I train people online using the very program that I have on there. When you look at the home program, the way I would begin that is I would just get like one set of weights. I wouldn't get super heavy weights, maybe 10 pounders. And I would learn all the exercises so that the program is set up. And then I would go through that and I would learn those exercises. So I set it up where you start off with 3 days a week so that you have that learning curve. And then as you get better at it, as you get stronger, then I cut it down to 2 days a week. But I had a few exercises here and there just to keep the intensity factor up and making sure you get a good quality workout. But it's laid out pretty systematically. But I do say there is a learning curve in the middle of it. Does that make sense, George?
Yeah. So it sounds like if you're using like weights, then it sounds like it's mostly, call it upper body.
No, we do full body. Full body workouts. Yeah, I train your body as a unit. And so I don't, there are times you can change, some people like to change their body parts. I say what the research that I've used or that I've come up with over the years, 2 full body workouts per week are perfect. for building muscle. And you try to be progressive with that. Either add a little bit. I like to measure time when I'm weight training rather than reps. You can measure both, whatever's easiest for you. But the reason I measure time is I try to keep the muscle under tension for a period of time. And I don't let my muscles take a break, and it creates a really deep burn. And so but that's where the magic happens. And that's how you can get an efficient workout in a very short period of time, by just challenging your muscles to a certain point. And then you add a little weight when you get to a point, but strength, it's finite. It's not infinite. So there's a point where you're going to get to, hey, this is as strong as I can be. And then when I get to that point, that I use the weight, all the weight is a tool. The weight is a tool to stimulate muscles. So I learn how to use that tool better. And that way I train my muscles and save my joints, because there's so many injuries that come along with certain weight training activities.
Yeah.
There was a program, P90X or something like that, and it's making a comeback. And I'm like, I remember the injuries associated with that, because they use ballistic movements. I mean, if people want to do it, great, but I think you should be aware of what could happen.
Just as a quick follow-up, do you have a perspective on isometric type exercises for?
Use it all the time. It's wonderful. And the
What is
reason
isometric exercise?
So when you're going to push against the object that doesn't move. Now they're overcoming isometrics. I use what's called time static contractions. I got it from a guy named Ken Hutchins. So for example, if you're sitting at a desk and you put the palms of your hand, make a fist, put the palm of your hand here, and drive into the bench or the desk, you're going to feel those muscles contract. So how I do it is I have people do it for 90 seconds. I have them do 30 seconds pushing at about 50%, 30 seconds at about 75%, and then I do 30 seconds as hard as you dare. The two priors, they fatigue the muscle so much that when you go as hard as you dare, the chance of injury is way, way lower. And I always say as hard as you dare, not as hard as you can, because people will brace and do everything they can. But the idea is just to target a particular muscle using isometrics. And it's perfect for older people, because our joints don't always work as well.
And listen, what you just heard is what this book is about. It's this simple and it's this doable. The reason most of us don't get involved in exercise is because, as Steve said, it's just so doggone complicated, and there's so much of it and so much shame involved. Listen, Christians ought to be healthier than they are, but I want Steve to know that I'm not going to stop smoking. I'm just not going to enjoy it as much as I used to. The name of the book: The Gospel of Fitness, a rational approach to aging gracefully. And we're going to continue to learn, so don't go anywhere. Just like Jesus, Steve, and the rest of us are coming back. Hey, thanks for spending time with us here. By the way, if you haven't yet subscribed to our weekly Key Life email, now's the time. Steve McKinney says signing up will burn an entire 17 calories. So do some deep knee bends, then go to keylife.org/surprise.
Have you tried to do deep knee bends recently?
I don't even know what that is.
Let me tell you, those.
You do it in the deep end of the pool?
Oh, no. We're talking about outside. You can do anything in the pool because you weigh half of what you normally weigh when you're in the pool. Just one quick follow-up question about the pool. I bought, not too long ago, online, 1 pound, just 1 pound weights for each wrist and each ankle for in the pool.
You swim, you're going to drown.
Yeah, this is a terrible.
That's what the mafia does. They put weights on you and you sink to the bottom.
Stop. You had your turn. Is that, you can, I mean, when they dry out, obviously you can use it when you walk as well, which would be helpful. And that was sort of what I had in mind. And I've never done anything with it at all with walking because I haven't done the walking, which I'm now going to try doing. Is that a good thing? I'm thinking of something of as additional resistance of some kind, because I swim for 30 minutes and I mean, I know that it's good for me, but I don't feel anymore like, I mean, I'm not winded or anything because it really is very easy to do. Right now, when it's so cold here, it's the pool is 90 degrees. So it's the getting out that's a little dicey, but I feel like there's some resistance or something that's needed at this point. Cause I don't know that I think it's really a workout anymore.
Oh no, you're right on. You're right on. So I'll explain a few things. So the first thing I would say when I add those weights, obviously you don't want to be in a position that's dangerous, but my question would be, do they feel good to you to do that? Does that feel good?
Yes.
Yeah. So there's nothing wrong with that. Now, what will happen a lot of times is people will want to add more weights, but you have to remember this, Kath, when you're walking with a weight that you're not used to, that is when I do exercise, I use a weight to load the muscle and keep it under the load for a particular time. I'll give you an example of what I mean. If you make a bicep and you squeeze it very short, just like this, and you feel that muscle, but you never let the tension go away. That's what I mean by being under the load. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. So now when I put something on my ankle and I start walking, it's going to be loaded and then unloaded. And generally what's going to happen, even though it's 1 pound, it's going to take my knee and it's going to pull it just a little bit. It's going to be micro pulls. So I'm concerned with long-term use of that. That's where overuse injuries come in. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So if you do that twice a week, are we still looking at like the long-term usage or
no, you can try it.
Okay.
No, I would just be aware of how I felt. But what I'm leaning to though is intuitively you are understanding what I talk about. Okay. You're understanding that you need resistance and you need to challenge your muscles more. You've become an expert at swimming. Here's what your body does. Your body it becomes super efficient at what you do. There's something called the SAID principle. It's specific adaptation to imposed demand. Here's what that means. When you want to be a better swimmer, you don't go climb a mountain. You swim, because swimming is specific. So you've been doing this for a while. Now you're an expert at swimming. So your body gets so fluid at it and so good at it that you're not challenged anymore. Right. And that's why you're saying, hey, I need challenged. I would say to get you some 3 to 5 pound weights, and I would use the weightlifting program outside, just the way I have it set up in the book. Okay. I would use that. I think it's going to help you way more. And you're going to notice that you're going to be a better swimmer because you're going to be stronger, and strength matters in most everything.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Steve, talk to us about balance. What can we do when you're an old person like me other than quit drinking? I mean, how do we deal with balance? What are some things we need to do?
Very real thing. Balance is a real challenge. And so a lot of times balance comes from loss of strength. I talk about it in the book where one of my buddies, he's a chiropractor, he sent his dad to me, Dr. King, and his dad's name was Charlie. He had prostate cancer and he was older, and he said, Steve, I'm losing my balance. I said, Charlie, you're losing your strength. Now back then he was still a newspaper reader, and there was a section called Ask the Doctor, and about a month later he brought in this section. He goes, Steve, you were totally right. Look what Ask the Doctor says. He says when you lose your balance, you lose your strength. And so the big thing is the loss of strength that happens with the loss of balance. And so as we got Charlie stronger, his balance got better. Now that's not the only reason, but that's one of the major reasons. Another thing that I have seen is that when people walk as they get older, what happens is the bottom of their foot will hit the floor, but their tendons get a little tighter, so their toes come up off the floor a little bit. And so your toes are really important with balance. So an exercise you can do is you put a towel on the floor in front of you as you sit in a chair, and you try to roll the towel up with your toes. You may not get very far, but what you're going to do is you're going to add some mobility in your toes, and that's going to help with balance. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah,
Wow.
it does. Everything
So now
you
let me
say
take it
makes sense.
further. Let me take it further. So what you'll see is you'll see people say, hey, stand on one leg to improve your balance. Well, going back to my principle of the SAID principle, specific adaptation to impose demand, what does standing on one leg make you good at? Standing on one leg.
Yeah.
Does that apply to our balance? It can. It can, because when you're standing on that one leg, you're working these little muscles that may not get worked in another way. That's why you'll see some progress with that. But specifically, it's going to make you good at standing on one leg. So, but if I can get you stronger, if I can increase your stride, I'll give you one more thought. I talk about walking for 30 minutes after dinner. I tell people who walk outside to make sure that you're not just looking down. As you get older, you begin to look down, and that's what messes with your balance. I'll tell people this all the time. When you go out, you may go 2 or 3 blocks looking down, but I want you to stop for a minute, grab something, and then look up. And what you're going to see is you're going to have this awe and wonder, because the heavens cry out, the creation cries out for the glory of God. And so there's a subliminal thing that goes on, a spiritual thing that goes on in the middle of that as I look around, and I kind of connect those things as well. So that's kind of how I approach those things. But I just change my gaze when I'm walking from 5 feet in front of me to about 20 feet. And then my balance gets a little bit better.
Oh, man. Listen, if your sermons are as practical as what you've given us today, man, I'm going to have you teach one of my preaching classes. It's so good because it's so doable. Guys, you really ought to get this book. It's different, and it really is helpful in the most basic ways, especially for those of us who don't like these kind of books. You're going to love this one. It's called The Gospel of Fitness, A Rational Approach to Aging Gracefully. Steve, thanks for being with us. I hope we can do this again.
Thank you, guys. I had just a blast. I love it. I love talking about this stuff. It's on Amazon, by the way.
It shows. Okay, you can get it on Amazon. And Steve, if you're in Central Florida, it's going to be at Forge. Go to forgetruth.com, and you can get some dates and some times and be able to see him in living color. Don't go away. I really didn't think I was going to like the program. It's kind of like programs that deal with something that I'm having trouble dealing with. I don't want to talk about it. But Steve McKinney makes it good, just as Jesus makes our life with him good, too. You think, I don't want to do that. I'm not going to go there. I'm just not. And then all of a sudden you realize love and simplicity and kindness and mercy become the reality of your life. And you think, I can do that. I can do that. And Steve McKinney does that with exercise. In fact, we've been discussing off the air using weights. I might go get some weights and give them to Kathy so she can use them swimming. No,
You
seriously.
really are trying to kill me, aren't you?
No, I'm not. I just think that's dangerous, man. Swimming with weights sounds like mafia stuff, and but this is important. Our health is important because we're important to God. Now, God says twice in the scripture that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit. The first time he says it is in 1 Corinthians 3, and it's the plural, and he's talking about the church, not your body, so don't let your wife use it or your husband to get you to stop smoking. But he says it another time, and it's singular, and that means that the Holy Spirit dwells in us. We ought to have a house that is in pretty good repair until this old house needs to be torn down and we get a new one in heaven. Good program. I'm glad we did it, and I didn't think I would be. Kathy, who we're going to have next week?
We have no idea.
Oh, great. That's always the wonderful answer I love from you.
Well, the interesting
No deal.
the interesting thing is that right now we're actually, recording a couple of weeks in advance. So we do have a little bit of time in front of us. So I feel fairly confident that
somebody will show.
That we'll move in the proper direction. Yeah.
I'm sure. And if we don't.
Maybe, who knows? We might even be able to get our new president.
Now, that would be, could you pull that off?
Well, probably not, but thought I'd throw it out there.
Have you tried?
No, not yet. Well, he's only been president for 24 hours.
Well, what you're waiting for? I mean, there's going to be a long line. You ought to at least get in the line.
I'll see what I can do.
Guys, we're going to come back next week. Same time, same place. We have no idea who will be our guest, but you will like it. Trust me on that. Between now and then, don't do anything we wouldn't. That gives you a wide, wide berth.